Welcome to Stories Pulse. If you enjoyed this gripping tale and want more exciting stories like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button, like, and share with your friends. We love hearing your thoughts, so don't forget to leave a comment below. Your support helps us bring you the best in storytelling. Stay tuned for more captivating adventures, because at Stories Pulse, we're just getting started. The Cortez mansion stood imposing against the Boston sky, its mirrored windows reflecting the setting October sun. Inside, Leonardo Cortez, a millionaire businessman, sat at his desk on the top floor, gazing out at the city. A glass of whiskey sat untouched on the mahogany table before him. His dark brown eyes were fixed on a distant point as his mind wandered through the empty corridors of his life. The sound of the door opening snapped him back to reality. Margaret, his assistant of over a decade, stepped inside with a black folder in her hands. "Mr. Cortez, the CVS of the candidates you requested," Margaret said, her voice calm yet carrying a note of concern. She knew the situation all too well. Leonardo turned his chair toward her. "How many this time?" he asked, his voice betraying a hint of weariness. 15, all with excellent references and experience with children who need special care. Leonardo picked up the folder, flipping through the documents. Each candidate seemed perfect on paper, but he had learned long ago that appearances could be deceiving. "Schedule interviews with the top 3 for tomorrow," he instructed. Margaret hesitated for a moment, then added, "Dr. Matthews called. He insists that Lucas needs stability. Changing babysitters every 2 months isn't good for him." Leonardo's voice turned cold as he responded, "I pay Dr. Matthews to look after my son's health, not to give me advice on how to run my household." He cut her off sharply. Margaret nodded, recognizing the cue to leave, but before she exited, she hesitated. "Lucas asked if you'd have dinner with him tonight." A muscle tensed in Leonardo's jaw. "I have a video conference with investors in Tokyo. Tell him..." He paused, remembering his son's disappointed expression when he made such excuses. "Cancel the conference. I'll be there at 7. He sat back in his chair, lost in thought. He opened the top drawer of his desk and pulled out a photograph. Catherine smiled in the picture, her green eyes shining, the same intensity that Lucas had inherited. 5 years had passed since the accident, but the pain was as vivid as ever. Downstairs, he heard Lucas's characteristic cough, followed by the gentle voice of Mrs. Peterson, the temporary nanny. She was the 5th this year. Leonardo knew he needed someone permanent, but the idea of entrusting his son's care to a stranger terrified him. Walking down the marble stairs, he found Lucas in the living room, wrapped in his favorite blanket, watching a documentary about the oceans. When Lucas saw him, the boy smiled, and Leonardo felt the familiar tightness in his chest. Lucas was the living image of Catherine, from his golden curls to the freckles on his nose. "Dad, are you having dinner with me tonight?" Lucas asked. "Yes, champ." "How about we order that pizza you like?" Leonardo replied. Lucas's eyes lit up, but then another cough shook him. Mrs. Peterson quickly approached with the inhaler, and Leonardo stood helplessly as his son struggled to breathe. Moments like this reminded him of how much was at stake, how much he needed to protect the only person who still mattered in his life. Later, after putting Lucas to bed, Leonardo sat in his private office. He turned on the monitors showing every room in the house. It had become his nightly ritual to ensure everything was in order and that his son was safe. Tomorrow he would meet the candidates, and one of them would be chosen to be a part of this hermetically controlled world he had built for his son. As he flipped through the CVS, one name caught his eye: Isabella Martinez. Her references were impeccable, her experience with sick children extensive. But it was something about her photo that made him pause. A genuine smile, something that reached her eyes unlike the rehearsed expressions of the other candidates. His phone rang, breaking his concentration. It was her lawyer, Richard. "Leonardo, I've received the documents for the new nanny. Do you want me to include the same confidentiality clauses?" "All of them," Leonardo replied without hesitation. "And add one about the security cameras. You know that can scare off good candidates." Richard's voice grew more cautious. "Leonardo, cameras everywhere. That could make her uncomfortable." Leonardo looked at Catherine's photo again, a cold resolve settling in. "Anyone who has nothing to hide won't have a problem with surveillance." He hung up the phone and turned his attention back to Isabella's CV. Tomorrow he would meet her in person. Something about her intrigued him, and Leonardo Cortez wasn't accustomed to feeling curious about anyone. The next day, the Cortez Enterprises meeting room was filled with tension. Isabella Martinez entered, her calm demeanor contrasting with the sterile atmosphere of the room. She was dressed in a simple, discreet navy blue ensemble. Leonardo sat across from her, studying her carefully. "Ms. Martinez," he began, his voice controlled, "your resume is impressive. 6 years caring for children with special needs, specialization in pediatric nursing, exemplary letters of recommendation. Almost too perfect." Isabella smiled slightly. "Mr. Cortez, I learned early on that perfection is an illusion. What I offer is not perfection, but absolute dedication and honesty." Leonardo was taken aback by her response. "Tell me about your last experience." "I cared for little William for 3 years. He had cystic fibrosis. Those were challenging but rewarding years. Unfortunately," she paused, her eyes reflecting a trace of emotion, "William passed away 6 months ago. That's when I decided I needed some time to process the loss." "And what makes you think you're ready to take on another complex case?" Leonardo asked, studying her closely. "Because grief taught me compassion, not fear. Your son deserves someone who understands that caring goes beyond administering medication and following protocols," Isabella said, her voice steady but passionate. Leonardo stood up and walked over to the window. "Ms. Martinez, I need to be straightforward. This position requires more than professional competence. There are security cameras throughout the house. Your privacy will be limited. Many find it too invasive." "I understand your need to protect your son, Mr. Cortez," Isabella replied calmly. "If I were in your position, I would probably do the same. But I hope that in time, you'll realize that trust is built through actions, not surveillance." Leonardo turned to face her, his gaze sharp. "Are you questioning me, Ms. Martinez?" "No, sir," she replied, her voice unflinching. "I'm being honest, as I promised at the beginning of this conversation." A dense silence filled the room, broken only by the soft creaking of the door. Margaret, who had been watching the interaction from the doorway, held her breath. In 15 years, she had never seen anyone subtly challenge her boss like that. "Would you like to meet Lucas?" Leonardo asked, surprising even himself. On the 4th floor of the mansion, Lucas was finishing his physiotherapy session when they entered. His green eyes lit up at the sight of his father, but it was Isabella who captured his attention. "You must be Lucas," she said, approaching with a warm smile. "I hear you're a fan of documentaries about oceans." Lucas's face lit up. "Do you like them too?" "I love them," Isabella said. "Did you know humpback whales sing different songs every year?" Lucas laughed, a sound that made Leonardo freeze. He hadn't heard that laugh in weeks. For the next hour, Isabella spoke to Lucas about abyssal seas, coral reefs, and her experiences as a volunteer at an aquarium. Leonardo watched, noticing how she naturally incorporated breathing exercises into their conversation, all while keeping Lucas engaged. Later in his office, Leonardo sat reviewing the employment contract. Margaret entered with a cup of coffee. "The other candidates are still waiting, sir." "Cancel the interviews," Leonardo replied, not taking his eyes off the document. "Ms. Martinez starts tomorrow." "Are you sure?" She was quite frank during the interview. "Precisely why Lucas needs someone who isn't afraid to tell the truth, even if it means confronting me occasionally," Leonardo said thoughtfully. That evening, while checking the cameras one last time, Leonardo paused on a recording of Isabella and Lucas. There was something about the way she interacted with him, a blend of professionalism and genuine affection, that he couldn't ignore. His phone vibrated with a message from Richard. "Contract sent to Ms. Martinez. She's already signed and returned it. Start tomorrow at 7 a.m. Leonardo looked at Catherine's photo on his desk. "What would you think of her, my love?" he whispered into the silence. The answer came in the form of a memory. Catherine had always said, "Eyes don't lie." Isabella Martinez's eyes conveyed a truth he couldn't deny. Closing the monitors, Leonardo allowed himself a moment of hope. Maybe, just maybe, he had found someone who could bring light not only to Lucas's life, but to the entire house that had lived in shadows for so long. The dawn brought with it a soft mist that covered the gardens of the Cortez mansion. Isabella arrived punctually at 7, carrying a modest bag and a small package wrapped in colorful paper. Margaret greeted her in the entrance hall, guiding her upstairs.